I married my husband's brother, written and narrated by Amar audiobook.
Chapter 1. The lie was sweeter than the champagne. And the champagne, Isabella knew, was $500 a bottle crystal. It tasted like ash in her mouth. She smiled, a careful, practiced motion that didn't dare touch her eyes. The smile was for her new husband, Lorenzo Falcone, the golden heir to the Falcone shipping empire, a flimsy euphemism for the web of steel, blood, and shadow that controlled the city's docks. Lorenzo, bless his heart, believed the lie. He smiled back, his eyes, so unlike his father's or brother's, holding a genuine, uncomplicated warmth. He was beautiful, in the way of a Renaissance angel, all soft curls and kind gestures. He was her salvation. He was the safe harbor her family had bartered for, and she had agreed to the trade with a desperate, white-knuckled relief. "You are the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, mia cara," Lorenzo whispered, his lips brushing the shell of her ear as he drew her onto the sprawling marble dance floor. The ballroom of the Falcone villa was a Gothic masterpiece. All vaulted ceilings, dark oil paintings of dead Falcones, and chandeliers that dripped diamonds of light. It was a palace built on sin, and tonight it was packed with the beautiful and the damned, all pretending to be civilized. Isabella's gown, a cascade of white silk and hand-sewn pearls, was worth more than her family's car. It felt like a shroud. "And you, mio marito," she murmured back, "are a very smooth talker." He laughed, a light, easy sound that was jarring in the oppressive weight of the villa. He was the dove in this nest of vipers. He twirled her, and for a half-second the lie felt real. She could be happy here, she could be safe. Then she saw him. He was not on the dance floor. He was never part of the celebration. Sergio, the scar Falcone, stood half-hidden in the shadows of a grand archway, a glass of dark liquor in his hand, his gaze a physical weight against her skin. Where Lorenzo was the sun, Sergio was the void. He was the family's enforcer, the monster they kept in the basement, the brutal counterpoint to his perfect older brother. He wasn't just in the shadows, he was the shadow. He wore a tuxedo like it was a suit of armor, the black fabric stretched taut over shoulders that were built for violence. And the scar. It was the thing legends were made of. It started at his left temple, cutting a vicious, silvered path down, catching the corner of his eye and dragging his upper lip into a permanent, cruel sneer. He didn't just have a scar. He was the scar. It was a map of every dark rumor she'd ever heard about the Falcone's younger son. He hated her. From the moment her engagement was announced, his hatred had been a cold, constant presence. He looked at her not just with dislike, but with a deep personal resentment, as if her very existence was an insult. He saw her as she was, a payment, a pretty piece of property traded to shore up an alliance, a symbol of the legitimacy Don Falcone craved and Sergio so clearly despised. His eyes weren't on his brother. They were on her. They weren't admiring. They were assessing, possessing, hating. Isabella forced her gaze away, her heart a cold stone against her ribs. She leaned into Lorenzo, her designated savior. "He's staring," she whispered, her voice trembling. Lorenzo didn't need to ask who. He sighed, the warmth dimming for a moment. "Ignore him, Mia." His hand found the small of her back. "Sergio is... he is what my father made him. He is not our concern tonight. Tonight, only you are my concern." He pulled her closer, and Isabella buried her face in his neck, breathing in the scent of him, clean soap and the faint, sweet tang of the champagne. Safety. This is safety. The song, a slow classical waltz, swelled to its crescendo. The applause from their captive audience was deafening. Lorenzo dipped her, his smile blinding, a perfect, beautiful lie for a perfect, beautiful moment. That's when the first sound cut through the music. It wasn't a gunshot. It was the sound of a champagne flute shattering, not by being dropped, but by being hit with a high-velocity projectile. Pop-tink. Then all at once, the thwack, thwack, thwack of silenced weapons, the screams, the heavy, wet thud of a body hitting the marble floor. It was fast. So terribly fast. Isabella didn't even have time to scream. Lorenzo's body, which seconds before had been fluid and warm, went rigid. He made a small sound, a soft, surprised, "Oh," and his weight became immense. "Lorenzo," she whispered. His arms, locked around her waist, were the only things holding him up. She looked down. The pristine white silk of her dress was turning crimson. Not a splash. A flood. The pearls were drowning in it. "Lorenzo!" she screamed, her voice tearing. His knees buckled and he took her down with him, a dead weight of love and shattered promises. His warm, kind eyes were already glazing, looking at her with a profound, terrible surprise. He tried to speak. A bubble of blood, bright and obscene, frothed at his lips. Isa... No, stay with me, Lorenzo, please," she sobbed, her hands slipping on the front of his ruined tuxedo as she tried to hold him, to keep the life inside him. The ballroom was a war zone. The gentle guests were screaming and diving for cover. The Falcone soldati, who had been disguised as waiters and valets, had emerged with weapons of their own, their faces masks of cold fury, shouting, "Code 3! Code 3! Protect the Dawn!" But no one had protected the Dawn's son. Isabella cradled her husband's head in her lap, her own screams a thin, distant sound. The music was still playing, a grotesque, automated waltz for the dead. "Get her up!" The voice was not a request. It was a command that sliced through the chaos like a razor. Isabella looked up, blinded by tears and the glittering, horrible chandeliers. Sergio Falcone stood over her. He was untouched. His glass was gone, replaced by a gleaming black pistol held with terrifying ease at his side. His face was unreadable, the scar a pale white against his suddenly flushed skin. He was not looking at his dead brother. He was looking at her. His eyes raked over her, from her tear-streaked face to her blood-soaked hands, down to the crimson ruin of her dress. There was no pity, no comfort. There was only a cold, dark assessment. "I said," he repeated, his voice a low growl that vibrated with suppressed violence. "Get her up." Two of his men, who looked more like butchers than bodyguards, grabbed her arms. "No! Lorenzo!" she shrieked, fighting them, clawing at the marble to stay with him. "Don't leave him!" "He's not going anywhere," Sergio said, his voice bored, as if a man dying at his feet was a mild inconvenience. The men hauled Isabella to her feet, her silk and pearl and blood-caked dress tearing. She was a ruin, a widow of 20 minutes. Don Falcone, the patriarch, was being rushed out a side door, his face a mask of stone. He didn't even look back. Sergio was in charge. The shadow was in the light. He watched her, a new, terrible calculation in his eyes. He was seeing the chessboard, not the tragedy. He saw a problem, an asset, a mess. What do we do?" one of the men asked, his hand tight on Isabella's arm. Sergio didn't take his eyes off her. He let the silence stretch, letting her hang in it, letting her drown in the realization of her new reality. Her salvation was dead. The vipers were all that remained. "Clean her up," he said, his voice flat. "Take her to the East Wing." He finally looked at his brother, his beautiful, perfect, dead brother. Then his gaze snapped back to Isabella, and the hatred she'd seen before was nothing compared to the ice-cold contempt that filled his eyes now. "And lock the door." She doesn't leave. Chapter 2. The marble was so cold it burned. Isabella's heels were gone, lost somewhere on the bloody dance floor. The men holding her up were dragging her, her bare feet slipping and stuttering on the polished stone. She was fighting, but it was a pathetic, kitten-like struggle against the inevitable. Her sobs were choking her, ripping from her throat in raw, ragged bursts. "No, please, Lorenzo," she wept, the word a prayer, a denial. "I have to go back. He's there. He's all alone." "He's dead, signora," one of the men said, his voice not unkind but hard. Final. His grip on her arm was a band of iron. "You can't call me that," she gasped, a strange hysterical laugh bubbling in her chest. "La signora, a wife, a widow, all in the span of a single waltz." They reached the grand oak doors of the ballroom. Behind her, the scene of her new life's destruction was a tableau of nightmares: overturned tables, shattered crystal, and the still, dark shape of her husband on the floor, a spreading pool of crimson ruining the white Falcone rose emblem inlaid in the marble. And Sergio. He was standing over his brother, his back to her, a black-suited monolith of sudden, absolute authority. He hadn't flinched. He hadn't shed a tear. He had just taken control. The men pulled her through the archway, and the heavy doors swung shut with a deep, echoing thud. The sound of the chaos was instantly muffled, replaced by the suffocating, tomb-like silence of the Falcone villa's main hall. The contrast was a physical blow. Just seconds ago, she was surrounded by music, by screams, by the sounds of her world ending. Now there was only the sound of her own ruined breathing and the scuff of her feet on the floor. The portraits of dead Falcones, generations of them, stared down from the walls, their oil-painted eyes dark with judgment. They had seen this all before. Bloodshed was in the villa's mortar. She was a fool to ever think she could be safe here. "Where are you taking me?" she whispered, the fight draining out of her, leaving a hollow, freezing void. "Don Sergio's orders," the other guard grunted. He was the one who looked like a butcher. "The East Wing." He said Don Sergio. The word hit her. Not Sergio, not the brother. Don. The transition of power was as fast and as brutal as the bullets that had torn through her husband. Don Falcone was gone. Rushed away or in seclusion, it didn't matter. The power had settled on the only shoulders broad enough and cruel enough to bear it. The shadow was now the master. They didn't take her to the bridal suite, the beautiful, light-filled rooms overlooking the ocean where she was supposed to spend her wedding night. They took a different path, down a long, dark corridor she had never been permitted to see. The air grew colder. The paintings grew darker. The scent of roses and champagne was replaced by the faint, sharp smell of old polish, and something deeper, like dust and secrets. They stopped at a heavy, unadorned door and shoved her into a small antechamber. 2 maids were waiting. They were dressed in drab black uniforms, their faces pale and still, their eyes fixed on the floor. They looked like statues of terror. "Clean her!" the butcher guard ordered. He and his partner turned, standing at attention just outside the door, their presence a promise. There was no escape. Isabella stood there, trembling, a half-naked, blood-drenched ruin. The white silk of her dress was a tattered, gory mess. The pearls were cracked, some missing, the threads hanging. One of the maids, an older woman with a face like dried leather, finally looked up. Her eyes held no pity, only a cold, terrifying obedience. The maid produced a pair of long, sharp sewing shears. Isabella flinched, a small cry escaping her. "What are you—" The maid didn't answer. She simply grabbed a fistful of the ruined silk at Isabella's shoulder. The snip, snip, snip of the shears was loud in the silence. They weren't undressing her. They were excising her from the dress. They cut it from her body in rough, efficient pieces. The bodice fell away, then the skirt. The priceless silk pooled at her feet like a slaughtered animal. They were rough, their hands calloused as they tore the delicate lace lingerie beneath. There was no modesty here. This was not an act of care. It was a decontamination, an erasure. She was left standing naked, shivering, her skin sticky with her husband's lifeblood. Into the tub. A copper-lined tub, old-fashioned and deep, was already steaming in a small adjoining bathroom. They pushed her toward it, and she stumbled in, the hot water a searing shock against her cold skin. She watched, numb, as the water around her turned a faint, swirling pink. They began to scrub her, not gently, not with soft cloths, with rough, abrasive brushes, the kind used for floors. They scrubbed her arms, her chest, her legs, their faces grim, their movements mechanical. They were scrubbing away Lorenzo's last touch. They were scouring her of the evidence. I can do it, she whispered, her voice cracking, as one of them roughly scrubbed her neck. The humiliation was a fresh, hot wave, more scalding than the water. The older maid paused, the brush in her hand. Don Sergio's orders, signora, she said, her voice a monotone. He said, clean her. He did not say, let her clean herself. He wants no trace. No trace. She wasn't a person. She was a piece of evidence to be washed, a problem to be managed. They finished. They hauled her out, wrapped her in a towel so rough it felt like sandpaper, and dried her with the same impersonal, brutal efficiency. There was no beautiful nightgown. There was no suitcase full of her belongings. There was only a single garment, laid out on a wooden bench. A simple, sleeveless, high-necked robe of heavy black silk. It was a uniform. A prisoner's uniform. A mourner's uniform. They dressed her in it, their fingers quick, as if touching her was something to be endured. The silk was cold against her raw, scrubbed skin. The guards returned. They didn't speak. They simply gestured. Isabella, now clean, now processed, was marched from the room. They walked her down another, even colder hallway to a set of imposing double doors at the very end of the wing. This was it. The East Wing. One of the guards produced a heavy iron key. The lock turning was a loud, grating final sound. The doors opened. In. Isabella stepped inside. The guards didn't follow. They just watched her cross the threshold, and then, with a heavy, groaning sound, they pulled the doors shut. The click of the lock turning from the outside was the loudest sound she had ever heard. It was the sound of a coffin being nailed shut. She was alone. The suite was vast. It was a cavern of shadows, the ceilings so high they were lost in darkness. A massive four-poster bed, draped in heavy dark velvet, sat in the center like a funeral pyre. The furniture was opulent, heavy dark wood, intricately carved. But it was all covered in white dust sheets, giving the room an eerie, ghostly quality. All except for the bed and a small hard-backed chair near the unlit fireplace. This was not a guest room. This was a room that had been waiting. Isabella stood in the center of the cold, dark expanse, her bare feet numb against the ancient wood floor. The adrenaline that had kept her moving, the shock that had kept her numb, was all gone. It had been scrubbed away with the blood, and in its place the grief rushed in. It was not a gentle wave. It was a physical, crushing force, a black ocean that swept her legs out from under her. A sound, a terrible animal sound of pure agony, was ripped from her chest. "Lorenzo!" She collapsed onto the floor, her body convulsing with sobs, her hands clawing at the black silk that covered her. He was gone. He was gone. Her salvation. Her kind, gentle, beautiful husband, the man who had promised her a safe, quiet life, the man who had smiled at her, believed her lies, and promised to protect her. He was dead. He was dead, and she was in hell. She cried until her throat was raw, until her eyes were swollen shut, until there was nothing left but the dry, racking heaves of a body that had no tears left to give. She lay on the cold floor for an unknown amount of time. An hour, maybe a lifetime. The cold seeped into her bones, and slowly a new emotion crept through the fog of her grief. It was colder than the floor, sharper than her sorrow. It was fear, a pure, undiluted terror that had a name. Sergio. He hadn't given the order to protect her. He hadn't given the order to comfort her. He had given the order to clean her, to lock her away. She was his. She dragged herself to her feet, her body aching, her new black uniform a cold, slick cage against her skin. She stumbled to the massive, locked doors, her hands pressing against the cold, unyielding wood. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice a dry croak. "Please, is anyone there?" Only the crushing, absolute silence of the East Wing answered. She was a widow. She was an orphan. She was a prisoner. Her husband was dead, her savior was gone, and the monster who hated her was now her keeper. Chapter 3. Time, in the East Wing, was a different element. It was not a river. It was a cold, stagnant pool. Isabella had no idea how long she lay on the floor, or how long she sat on the edge of the massive funereal bed, staring at the white-sheeted ghosts of furniture. The sun, when it rose, was a weak gray smear against the tall, leaded glass windows. It offered no warmth, only a dim, depressing light that revealed the room's age and neglect. The dust sheets, the locked door, the silence. It was a tomb. A room for something, or someone, the family wanted to forget. She was so dehydrated her throat felt like it was coated in sand. Her grief was a heavy physical ache, a stone in her stomach. But beneath the grief, the fear she'd felt last night had crystallized. It was no longer a panicked animal terror. It was a cold, sharp, intelligent dread. She was trapped. Her family had sold her, and the man who bought her was dead. The salvation she'd been promised was a lie, a brief, beautiful illusion that had cost Lorenzo his life, and it had delivered her to him. The sound when it came was so loud it made her jolt, her heart smashing against her ribs. It was the grating shriek of the key in the heavy lock. A thunk, thunk, thunk as the bolts were drawn back, and then the deep, groaning complaint of the massive doors opening. Isabella scrambled to her feet, backing away until the back of her legs hit the cold frame of the bed. She stood there, trembling, a prisoner awaiting her jailer. Sergio Falcone filled the doorway. He was not the man from the wedding. The man from the wedding had been a shadow in a tuxedo, his violence coiled and waiting. This man was the new reality. He was immaculate. While she was in a simple black robe, her hair a tangled, matted mess from tears and restless sleep, her feet bare and her eyes swollen, he was perfect. He wore a custom, three-piece suit of charcoal gray, so dark it was almost black. It was tailored to perfection, emphasizing the brutal width of his shoulders and the lean, hard-muscled strength of him. There wasn't a speck of dust on his polished Italian shoes, a new, crisp white shirt, a black-on-black patterned tie, knotted with brutal precision. He was clean, shaven. His dark hair was slicked back, making his face seem even more severe, more angular, making the scar that bisected it seem less like a flaw and more like a deliberate, artistic statement of violence. He looked, she thought, with a new wave of terror, like a king, like a man who had not just lost a brother, but who had been waiting for the throne. He didn't speak. He just stood in the doorway, his eyes, cold, dark, and assessing, raking over her. His gaze was a physical thing. It wasn't the way Lorenzo had looked at her, with warmth and admiration. It wasn't even the way other men looked at her, with simple, harmless desire. Sergio's gaze was an inventory. He looked at her bare feet on the cold floor. He looked at the simple, high-necked black robe, a garment he had undoubtedly ordered for her. He looked at her tangled hair, her tear-ravaged face. His gaze lingered for a half-second too long on her mouth, swollen from sobbing, and the sneer that was his scar's permanent gift seemed to deepen. He wasn't seeing a grieving widow. He was seeing an asset, a possession, a mess. "So," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to shake the dust from the air. "This is the 1,000-watt smile that bought you a Falcone." Isabella flinched as if he'd struck her. She had no answer. Her voice was gone. He stepped inside. He didn't just enter the room, he consumed it. The vast, empty space seemed to shrink around him. He walked past her, his scent rolling off him, not champagne and soap like Lorenzo, but something dark and sharp, like expensive whiskey, cedar, and iron. He walked to the center of the room, ignoring her completely, and looked around. The East Wing, he mused, his voice quiet. He ran a single gloved finger along the back of a dust-sheeted chair. He was wearing black leather gloves. "My father used to lock me in here when I was a boy. He said it was for contemplation." He looked at his clean fingertip, now smudged with dust. He was a sentimental man. Isabella could only stare. This room was his punishment? "It's fitting, then," he continued, turning to face her. He was between her and the door, the only escape. "My penance, and now yours. I don't understand," she whispered, her voice a dry, broken croak. What do you want?" "What I want." He laughed, a short, sharp, humorless sound that was more frightening than a yell. "What I want, Isabella," he said her name like it was a curse, a foul taste in his mouth, "is for my brother to not have a hole in his chest. What I want is to not be cleaning up his, and my father's catastrophic mess." He took 2 slow, deliberate steps toward her. Isabella instinctively flinched and fell back, sitting hard on the edge of the bed. His eyes lit with a cold, cruel amusement. He saw her fear, and he relished it. "Look at you," he said, stopping just out of her reach. He loomed over her. "The delicate little dove? The white rose. You were in my family for, what, 4 hours? And you got him killed?" "No," she gasped, the accusation a fresh wound. "No, I didn't. It wasn't." It was. His voice snapped like a whip, all in amusement gone, replaced by a sudden terrifying cold. Your weakness, your family and their desperate, pathetic alliances. You were the soft spot. You were the target." "I loved him," she whispered, a single hot tear escaping and tracing a path down her cold cheek. Sergio's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated contempt. "You didn't love him. You used him. You used him for his name, for his protection. You were a piece of paper, traded to make our family legitimate. And my brother, my stupid, soft-hearted, perfect brother, he fell for it. He bought the lie." He leaned in, bracing one hand on the bedpost beside her. She was trapped, his body a wall of hard muscle and cold fury. She could smell the iron on him again. "He's dead," Sergio whispered, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial, venomous hiss. "And my father, the great Don, has abdicated. He's shattered, so the mess, it's all mine." He pushed off the bedpost and began to pace, a caged tiger in a room he knew too well. "Which brings me to you," he said, gesturing to her. The widow. The grand problem. My family, she started, a new, desperate hope. They'll be looking for me. Your family. He stopped. He turned, and he smiled. It was the most terrible thing she had ever seen. The scar pulled his lip, but the smile never reached his dead, cold eyes. Your family was compensated for their loss this morning. They were paid handsomely for their broken merchandise. Isabella's blood ran cold. What? What do you mean? I mean your father signed a new contract. His alliance is to me now, and in exchange for his continued cooperation, he has agreed that you are a Falcone problem, not his. She was utterly, completely, terrifyingly alone. Her own father had just sold her. Again. What happens to me? She asked, her voice so small it was barely a sound. Sergio walked back to her, and this time he didn't stop. He stood directly in front of her, so close she could feel the body heat rolling off him, so close his knees were almost touching hers. He reached out. Isabella flinched, screwing her eyes shut. She felt the cool leather of his glove. It didn't strike her. It touched her. His index finger, gently, almost curiously, traced the tear track on her cheek. Her eyes snapped open. He was staring at her, his gaze intense, no longer cold, but burning with a dark, unreadable fire. It was the assessing gaze from the wedding, but 1,000 times more potent. The air between them was no longer just fear. It was something else. Something thick and hot and dangerous. It crackled. That, he whispered, is the question. He pulled his hand back, as if disgusted with himself, and wiped his glove on his trousers. In the old days, he said, his voice flat again, the strange moment broken. The vecchia legge, the ancient law. A widow, childless, became the responsibility of the next in line. She was absorbed. Property? To be cared for. He let the word cared for hang in the air, heavy with unspoken, brutal meaning. He was the next in line. You belong to me now, signora, he stated, the signora a deliberate, cruel mockery of her former title. You are my inheritance. My cross to bear. I am not a thing, she said, a spark of defiance, small and weak, rising through the terror. His dark eyes flashed. You are exactly what I say you are. You live in my house. You wear my clothes. He gestured to the black robe. You will eat my food, and you will stay in this room until I have found, and personally ended, every single person responsible for my brother's death. And when I am done, then I will decide what to do with you. He turned on his heel. Wait, she cried, the desperation making her bold. Please, don't lock me in here. I can't. I'll go mad. He paused at the door, his back to her. He was a perfect, dark silhouette against the gray light of the hall. You think you know madness? He said, without turning around. You've been in here for one night. I was in here for a month once. He looked back over his shoulder, and for a fleeting, terrifying second, she saw not the dawn, but the boy who had been locked in this room. The boy who had been forged into this monster. Be grateful for the quiet, Passerotto. Little bird. Out there. He gestured to the world beyond the door. The hunt has begun. And it is so much louder. He stepped out. He didn't slam the door. He just pulled it shut. His movements economical, controlled. And then, as she'd known it would, as she'd been dreading, came the sound. The shriek of the key. The thunk, thunk, thunk of the bolts. He had locked her in. Himself. Isabella sat on the bed, her entire body shaking, the phantom touch of his leather glove still burning on her cheek. He was right. She didn't know madness, but she was about to. Chapter 4. Days bled into one another, marked only by the shifting of the weak, gray light through the tall, leaded glass windows. Isabella's world had shrunk to the four walls of the East Wing suite. It was a prison, but a prison of contradictions. It was a tomb, but it was also a fortress. Her meals arrived on a silver tray, carried by the same two maids who had scrubbed her clean. They came 3 times a day, their faces as pale, silent, and obedient as ever. The food was simple, nourishing and tasteless: broth, bread, fruit. It was not the food of a guest, but the sustenance of a high-value prisoner. They never spoke. They would enter, set the tray on the single, hard-backed chair, and retrieve the tray from the previous meal. They kept their eyes down. They answered no questions. "Please," Isabella had whispered on the second day, her voice hoarse from disuse. "What? What day is it?" The younger maid flinched, her eyes wide with terror, as if Isabella had just asked her to commit treason. The older one, the one with the face of dried leather, simply shook her head once, a sharp, definitive gesture. Do not ask, do not speak. They were his. Their loyalty was to him, and their fear of him was greater than any pity they might have felt for her. He was not there, but his presence was absolute. It was in the silence of the maids, in the heavy thud of the guards' boots in the hallway, in the way the entire villa seemed to be holding its breath. She was alone, but she was never alone. The guards were always outside. She was the best protected woman in the country, and she had never been in more danger. She passed the time by exploring her cage. She took the dust sheets off the furniture one by one. The air filled with the scent of old velvet, lemon oil, and thyme. Beneath the sheets were priceless antiques, a dark, heavy desk, a chaise lounge upholstered in faded emerald green. In the desk she found nothing. No paper, no pens, no weapons. Every drawer was empty, wiped clean. This room had been prepared for her, purged of anything that could be a comfort or a means of escape. She learned to read the house. She learned that the guards changed at 6, morning and night. She learned that their footsteps were heavier, more agitated in the evening. And she learned through the thick walls to listen for the war. She didn't hear the war itself. She heard its echoes. Sometimes, in the dead of night, she would be woken by the sound of the main villa doors opening and closing, a distant, heavy slam that vibrated through the ancient stones of the house. She would hear the rumble of heavy cars coming and going at impossible hours. Once, she heard a man shout in the main hall. It was not Sergio. It was an older voice, thick with rage and grief. "You are tearing this family apart, Sergio. This is not justice, it is a massacre." There was no reply. Only a bone-chilling silence, and then the slam of a door so final it shook her own. She was living in the quiet eye of a hurricane he was creating. 5 miles away, in the cold, damp dark of the city's docklands, Sergio Falcone did not feel the cold. He felt nothing but a cold, clean, razor-sharp line of purpose. His grief was not the sobbing, helpless thing that had consumed his father. It was not the quiet, candle-lit mourning of a senora. His grief was an engine. It was a white-hot furnace, and it demanded fuel. "He's the last one, Don Sergio." His man, Rico, was bleeding from a cut over his eye, but he stood at perfect, terrified attention. The man on the chair was not so lucky. He was the opposite of Sergio's immaculate tailoring. He was a ruin of blood and broken bones, barely conscious. "The last one?" Sergio's voice was dangerously quiet. He stepped into the single, swinging light bulb's glare, and the man in the chair whimpered, a wet, pathetic sound. The last of the shooters, Rico clarified, his voice tight. We don't know who paid him yet. Then he is not the last one, Sergio said, his voice a silken, deadly correction. He took a handkerchief from his suit pocket, not for the blood, but to wipe the damp air from the handle of the tool in his hand. He crouched in front of the man. The man's eyes were swollen shut, but he flinched away from Sergio's scent. The whiskey, the cedar, the iron. You were at my house, Sergio said. It was not a question. You were at the wedding. You ate my food, you drank my wine, and you put a bullet in my brother. Wasn't me? The man gurgled, blood and teeth spilling from his mouth. I drove. I just drove. You drove, Sergio repeated, nodding, as if this were a reasonable academic point. You held the door. You were a part of the mechanism, and the mechanism is broken. He looked at the man's hands, which were tied to the chair. He was a pianist, my brother, Sergio mused, his voice distant, as if speaking to himself. Terrible, no passion, all technique. He learned it from a book. He did everything from a book. He was perfect. He turned his cold, dark gaze back to the man. And you're a driver. You need your hands, yes? And your feet. Please, the man sobbed. Please, Dawn. Have mercy. Mercy? Sergio stood up. The word seemed foreign on his tongue. Mercy is what my brother gave. Mercy is what he showed to his enemies. Mercy is what my father preached. Mercy. He looked around the damp, dripping warehouse. Is what got my brother a white rose painted red on his own dance floor. He turned to Rico. He has 10 minutes to tell you who paid him. Use his feet first. I need his hands to hold the pen so he can write the name down. And after dawn? Sergio walked to the door, pulling his black leather gloves back on, his movements precise. He was already done. The man was already dead. After, Sergio said, not looking back, you send what's left to his boss. With a note. I'm coming. And Rico, clean yourself up. You're getting blood on the car. The next morning, Isabella's tray was different. The food was the same, but next to the plate of dry toast, there was a newspaper. The Corriere della Sera. Folded. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. It was the first news from the outside world in... She had lost count. A week? The headline screamed up at her, a black and white wound. Slaughter in the docklands. A new war begins. The story was brutal, vague. It spoke of unknown assailants, of a gruesome scene, of a clear professional-style execution. It spoke of the Falcone family's tragic loss and the rumored instability of the entire underworld. It was a message. He wasn't just hunting, he was bragging. This was for her. He wanted her to know. He wanted her to be afraid of the world he was creating, the world he was cleansing. He wanted her to know that her cage was the only safe place left. She was reading it, her stomach churning, when the old maid returned for the tray. Isabella looked up from the paper, her eyes meeting the maid's. He's a monster, Isabella whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. She held up the paper. This is not grief. The maid's face, that leathery, impassive mask, did not change. She reached for the tray. He loved his brother, Isabella pressed, a desperate, sudden need to make this woman, anyone, see her, to feel a human connection. Lorenzo? He was so kind. He didn't deserve... Her voice broke, The maid froze. Her hand was halfway to the tray. Her eyes, for the first time, flickered. They moved from the tray to the newspaper to Isabella's face. Isabella saw it. A spark. A tiny, microscopic fissure in the stone. The old woman's gaze softened for a quarter of a second. Her voice, when it came, was a low, dry rustle, a sound not meant for Isabella's ears. "No," the maid whispered, her eyes darting to the door, terrified. "He didn't." She snatched the tray. "He was the only one," she added, her back to Isabella, her voice so low it was almost inaudible. "The only good one. The light." And then she was gone. The door was shut. The lock was turned. Isabella was left alone with the silence. But everything had changed. The only good one. The light. It was a confirmation. A truth she had already known. Lorenzo was the anomaly. His kindness. His gentleness. It was not a Falcone trait. Sergio. Sergio was the standard. His violence, his cruelty, his cold, immaculate rage. That was what it meant to be a Falcone. Lorenzo wasn't just an exception. He was a mistake. A mistake the family and the world had not been able to tolerate. That night she heard him. She was jolted awake, not by a sound but by a feeling, a shift in the air. The pressure in the house had changed. The hurricane had come home. There was a crash from the main hall, not a small crash. The sound of something massive, a vase, a statue being shattered. And then his voice. It was not the cold, quiet, calculating voice from her room. It was not the musing, philosophical sadist from the warehouse. This was a roar. "Where is he?" It was a sound of pure, unadulterated, primal rage. The sound of a man who had lost control, who had been pushed past his limit. Isabella scrambled from the bed, pressing her ear to the thick, cold door. She heard other voices, muted, terrified, placating. "Don Sergio!" "Signore, please, he is not here." "Liar!" Another crash. This one was closer. Glass. He was drunk, or wounded, or both. He was not the immaculate, untouchable king. He was a wounded animal. Isabel's heart was pounding, a frantic, terrified bird in her chest. She was locked in. She was safe. But for the first time, she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid for him. This was the crack. The one she had been looking for. This was the man beneath the monster. This was the grief he couldn't hide, the rage he couldn't control. He was not just a cold-blooded killer. He was a man in agony. And a man in agony was a man who could be reached. Or a man who could destroy everything around him, including the girl locked in his house. Chapter 5. The sound of his return was not a rumble but an explosion. Isabella had been in that state between sleep and waking, where the silence of the east wing became a roaring in her ears. The heavy upholstered furniture and thick carpets muffled everything, creating a sensory deprivation that left her nerves frayed, hyper-alert to any change in the atmosphere. The first sound was the slamming of the massive front door. It was a boom that vibrated through the stone floors, up the walls, and into the soles of her feet. It was not the crisp, controlled click of a man returning home. It was the violent impact of a man fleeing a war or starting a new one. She was out of bed in an instant, her bare feet silent on the cold Persian rug. She crept to the door, pressing her ear against the thick, carved oak. The guards were no longer there. She realized with a jolt that they had moved, their heavy footsteps receding down the hall moments before the door slammed. He was alone in the main hall. "Empty," his voice echoed, and it was a sound she had never heard before. It was not the cold, cutting baritone from her room. It was not the silken, terrifying whisper from the warehouse. This was a raw, ravaged growl. It was thick, slurring, and ripped apart by a grief so profound it was almost madness. All of it, Empty. A crash. The unmistakable sound of glass shattering, not a single glass, but many. A tray of crystal decanters, perhaps, swiped from a sideboard. Isabella's hand flew to her mouth, stifling her own gasp. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. He was drunk. Not just sipping whiskey, but blind, stumbling drunk. 20 years! He roared to the ghosts in the hall. 20 years, you old bastard! You gave him everything! A heavy, sickening thud. She pictured him slamming his fist against a wall. The name, the title, the light. You gave him the light. Another crash, this one followed by the ripping of fabric. Isabella flinched, picturing one of the ancestral portraits being torn from the wall. And me? He laughed, but the sound was a sob torn from his throat. You gave me the shadows. You gave me the scars. Silence. A heavy, ragged breathing that seemed to fill the entire villa. You gave me the knife and told me to protect the light. His voice broke on the last word. And I did. I did. I kept the shadows off him. I kept the filth. He was moving. She heard his footsteps, staggering, uneven, coming closer. Not toward her wing, but toward the grand staircase. And where were you? He whispered, a new venomous tone entering his voice. Where was Don Falcone? Signing papers, looking at his books, while his light went out. Isabella was frozen, her entire body trembling. This was not a performance, this was not a threat. This was a confession. This was the raw, unadulterated truth of Sergio the Scar Falcone. He wasn't a monster. He was a shield that had been given all the darkness so his brother could have all the light. He was the family's enforcer, its butcher, its sin-eater, and he had been crafted into that weapon by the same father who had doted on the perfect heir. And now, the one thing he had been built to protect was gone. The weapon was without a purpose. No, not without a purpose. Now the weapon was pointed at the rest of the world. She heard a clink, the sound of a bottle against a hard surface. He was at the small bar tucked under the main staircase. She did something she could not explain, an impulse born of a desperate, suffocating need for something, for a single human truth in this house of lies and grief. Her hand moved to the handle of her door. She knew, logically, it was locked. It was always locked. She turned it. The heavy brass handle moved smoothly under her palm. The latch clicked open. She froze. It was unlocked. For one heart-stopping second, she thought it was a trick. A test. He was waiting for her on the other side. But the drunken, broken monologue continued. He was unaware. He was lost in his own private hell. Why was it unlocked? The guards. When they heard him coming, they hadn't just moved away. They had fled. In their panic to not be in the path of the Dawn's rage, one of them had forgotten. Or perhaps one of them had unlocked it for her, a silent act of pity. Go to him. He is your problem now. She didn't open the door. She couldn't. But she stood there, her hand on the cold brass, a single 3-inch thick piece of oak separating her from the most dangerous man in Italy. He loved her, you know. Sergio's voice was suddenly quiet, closer than she expected. He must be leaning against the wall, just on the other side of the corridor. My perfect brother, he wrote poems to her. Isabella's breath hitched. Terrible poems, Sergio scoffed, and she heard the glug-glug-glug of him drinking straight from the bottle. No passion. All Words he found in a book. He slid down the wall. She heard the scuff of his expensive suit against the plaster. He was sitting on the floor. Right outside her wing, a drunken, broken king guarding the cage of the woman who symbolized everything he had lost and everything he had never been allowed to have. She was his last perfect thing, he slurred. And I quote. He didn't finish. A new sound started. At first, she thought he was choking. It was a harsh, rasping, repetitive sound. It took her a full minute to identify it. He was sobbing. It was not a human sound. It was the sound of an animal caught in a steel trap. A desperate, hopeless, agonizing sound that was being torn from his body against his will. It was the sound of a man who had not cried in 20 years. The sound of a dam of grief, rage, and resentment finally breaking. Isabella sank to her knees on her side of the door. She pressed her forehead against the wood, her own tears streaming silently down her face. She was crying for Lorenzo, the kind, gentle man she had barely known. She was crying for herself, for the life that had been stolen from her. And to her absolute, stomach-twisting horror, she was crying for the monster in the hallway. She was crying for the little boy who had been given a knife instead of a piano. The boy who had been told to live in the shadows to protect the light. She stayed there, kneeling at the door, for what felt like hours. She listened as the agonizing sobs subsided into ragged, drunken breathing, and finally, into the heavy, unconscious silence of sleep. He was asleep. On the floor. Outside her door. The lock clicked. Isabella jumped back, her heart leaping into her throat. She heard the heavy, silent tread of footsteps. Not the guards. Dio, Signore. It was an old voice. The butler, perhaps. A sound of profound pity and exhaustion. Let me help you, Don Sergio. She heard a grunt, the sound of a heavy body being lifted. He's gone, figlio mio. He's gone. The old man whispered, his voice thick. She's in there, Sergio mumbled, his voice dead, exhausted. I know, signore. I know. Let's get you to your bed. The house is safe. She is safe. Isabella listened as they shuffled away, the sound of one man, old and frail, supporting the full, dead weight of the new dawn of the Falcone family. She stood up, her legs shaking, and finally, turned the handle and opened the door. She peeked out into the magnificent, shadowed abyss of the grand hall. It was a war zone. A priceless Ming vase was in 1,000 pieces. A 17th century portrait of a grim-faced Falcone ancestor was slashed from top to bottom. And on the floor, where he had been sitting, was an empty bottle of Macallan 25 and a small, dark pool of liquid. He had not just been crying. She walked, her bare feet silent on the marble, and knelt. It wasn't just whiskey. It was blood. She looked at the wall where he had hid it. There, embedded in the plaster, was a single dark red smear. He had punched the wall until his knuckles split open, and in his drunken, grief-stricken state, he hadn't even felt it. Isabella stared at the blood on the floor. It was the crack. The undeniable physical proof. The monster could bleed, he could hurt, he could grieve. And in that moment, her terror, which had been a cold, solid thing, began to change. It didn't disappear, but it shifted. It made room for something else, something dark, and terrifying, and new. Pity. Chapter 6. Isabella didn't move for a long time. She knelt on the marble, the cold seeping into her nightgown, her fingertips inches from the dark, drying smear of Sergio's blood. It was a stark, brutal sigil left in the heart of the opulent hall. The chaos of his grief was everywhere. The shattered crystal, the gouged plaster, the ruined portrait. This was the real man. Not the cold, calculating Don who had locked her away. Not the silken-voiced killer from the warehouse. This was a man ripped open. A man who had been the family's brutal instrument and had just watched the only thing he was ever meant to protect be extinguished. A soft sound made her jump, the shuffling of slippers. "Child, you cannot be here." Isabella's head snapped up. It was Rosa, the elderly housekeeper who had been at the villa since before Lorenzo was born. She was a thin, bird-like woman with a face carved from worry, her gray hair in a tight bun, her black dress immaculate even at this hour. She held a dustpan and a brush. He was here," Isabella whispered, her voice hoarse. It felt like a betrayal to speak of it. Rosa's eyes, dark and knowing, drifted from Isabella to the blood on the floor. A profound, bone-deep sadness settled on her features. She did not seem surprised, only weary. "He has always carried the family's pain, Signorina," Rosa said, her voice a low murmur. "Since he was a boy. When his mother passed, his father, Don Antonio, he grieved, yes. But Sergio broke every window in the greenhouse. He was 10. She knelt, her old joints cracking, and began to sweep the largest shards of crystal into the pan. "He was not like Lorenzo," Isabella stated, the words tasting strange on her tongue. Rosa paused. "No. Don Lorenzo was born for the light. He was the day. He was kind." She looked at Isabella, her eyes sharp. "But Don Sergio, he was born for the night. He was given the darkness so that his brother could be safe in the day. And now the day is gone," Isabella finished for her. "Yes." Rosa stood, the pan heavy with shattered glass. "And there is only the night left. Go back to your room, Signorina. It is not safe for you to see this. It is not right for you to see this." The implication hung in the air. "It is not right for you to see his weakness." "He unlocked my door," Isabella said, the realization still sending a shock through her. "Or one of his men did." Rosa's face tightened. "That was a mistake. One that will not be made again. They were afraid. He has not been himself." "Who was he talking to?" Isabella pressed, needing to know. "He was yelling about his father." Rosa's lips thinned into a white line. "He was talking to ghosts, child. This house is full of them. Now, please, before he wakes, for your own safety." Isabella looked one last time at the blood smear on the wall. She backed away slowly, her bare feet padding silently over the cold marble, and slipped back into the dark sanctuary of her room. She did not just lock the door. She pushed one of the heavy, velvet-upholstered chairs against it, a barricade that she knew, even as she did it, was laughably useless. She did not sleep. She sat in the window seat, watching the black sky bleed into a bruised, sickly gray. She had seen the crack in the wall. She had heard the agony of the monster. And it changed everything. He was no longer just a monster. He was a man. A broken, dangerous, and devastatingly powerful man who was trapped in his own cage of duty and grief. Her terror, once a simple, cold stone in her stomach, was now a complex, living thing. It was threaded with a terrible, unwelcome, and profoundly dangerous pity. It was almost noon when she heard the sounds of the house. Not the quiet, terrified scurrying of the staff, but a new energy, a sharp, cold, decisive command. Her breakfast arrived, delivered by a different maid, a young girl with wide, frightened eyes who wouldn't meet Isabella's gaze. The girl set the tray down and practically ran from the room, locking the door firmly behind her. The chair was back in its place. The barricade was gone. Order was restored. A few hours later, the sound of footsteps approached. Not the heavy tread of guards, not the drunken stumble of the night before. It was a crisp, measured, relentless pace, the sound of a man in complete control. The key turned in her lock. Isabella stood from the window seat, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Sergio Falcone entered her room. He was immaculate. He was not the drunken, sobbing wreck from the hallway. He was not the blood-soaked killer from the warehouse. He was Don Sergio Falcone, the new head of the Cosa Nostra's most powerful family. His black, custom-tailored suit was perfectly pressed, his white shirt blindingly crisp, a simple black tie knotted at his throat. His dark hair was combed back, still damp from a shower. His face was clean-shaven, revealing the hard, unforgiving lines of his jaw. And the scar. Today, the scar looked less like a wound and more like a demarcation. A line drawn by a knife, separating the civilized man from the animal underneath. He looked as if he had slept for 10 hours in a silk bed. If it weren't for two things, Isabella might have believed she had hallucinated the entire night. The first was the air of absolute zero that radiated from him. He had been cold before. This was the Arctic. It was a void of all warmth, all emotion. The second was his right hand. His knuckles were split, bruised a sickening purple and black, and meticulously, almost antiseptically bandaged. He saw her staring at his hand. His eyes, dark and devoid of any light, flicked from her gaze to his own knuckles. He flexed his fingers, the movement precise, controlled. He didn't wince. "Good morning, Cognata," he said. His voice was flawless, a smooth, cold baritone. The gravel, the slur, the broken agony of the night before was gone, buried under 1,000 tons of ice. Or perhaps, "Good afternoon." Isabella's heart hammered. This was worse. The drunken, broken man had been terrifying. This controlled man was lethal. "You were busy," she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. His head tilted, a slow, predatory movement. "I was. I had the unfortunate task of identifying the remains of the men responsible for my brother's death." Isabella felt the blood drain from her face. "You found them." "I found them." He said it with the same emotional inflection he might use to say, "I found my car keys." "And they are?" "They are not," he stated simply. "And the man who paid them." His name was Anatoly Petrov. He was the head of a small, ambitious brat vassal. He, too, is not. He had spent the entire night, after breaking down in the hall, hunting and ending an entire rival organization. The blood on his knuckles was not just from the wall. "You did that last night," she whispered, horrified. "He made a miscalculation," Sergio said, walking further into the room. He didn't look at her, but at the heavy drapes. He saw the wedding as a moment of weakness. He assumed, incorrectly, that with my father gone and my brother soft, that the Falcone family was vulnerable. He reached the window and stood next to her, close enough that she could smell the sharp, expensive scent of his soap, overlaid with the faint, metallic tang of something else. Gun oil. "He learned," Sergio continued, his voice dropping, "that you do not attack a king when his vicious brother is still on the board." He turned his head and looked at her. Isabella stopped breathing. The proximity was overwhelming. He was a furnace of cold. He was so tall, so broad, he seemed to block out the light from the window. "You heard me last night," he stated. It wasn't a question. She couldn't lie. She couldn't speak. She just nodded, her eyes wide. He stared at her, his gaze so intense it was a physical weight. She felt it on her skin, on her bones. He was dissecting her. He was looking for something. Fear, revulsion, pity. "You will forget it," he commanded. You will forget it. His voice was a razor's edge. "That man, the one in the hall, he is dead. He died with my brother. Do you understand me?" "Yes," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Good." He looked away, back out the window. "The house will be in mourning for 6 months. You will not leave. You will not have visitors. You will be a widow in all things." "And after 6 months?" she dared to ask. His eyes snapped back to hers. The ice was gone, and for a fraction of a second, she saw the other thing. The thing from the warehouse. A fire. A possessive, obsessive, hungry fire. It was so fast she almost missed it. "After 6 months," he said, his voice a low, dangerous purr, "we will discuss your future. We will discuss the tradition." He was close enough now that his suit jacket brushed her arm. She flinched, but she couldn't back away. "You look pale, Isabella," he murmured, and it was the first time he had used her name since the wedding. It sounded like a sin in his mouth. "Grief does not suit you." He raised his uninjured hand, his left, and she was certain he was going to touch her. She was frozen, her entire body screaming run, but her feet were lead. His fingers hovered, a fraction of an inch from her cheek. She could feel the heat of his skin. "But black," he whispered, his eyes dropping to her black mourning dress. "Black suits you very well." He held her gaze for 1, 2, 3 agonizing heartbeats. Then he dropped his hand. The ice slammed back into place. "Rosa will bring you whatever you need," he said, his voice once again the flat, emotionless baritone of the dawn. He turned and walked to the door. "Sergio!" she called out, her own voice surprising her with its strength. He paused, his hand on the doorknob, his back to her. "Your hand," she said, nodding to his bandaged knuckles. "You should have Rosa look at that. It looks deep." He was perfectly still for a moment. "It is nothing," he said, without turning. "The pain is a reminder." "Of what?" He turned his head just enough to look at her over his shoulder. The coldness in his eyes was absolute. "That I am alive," he said, "and my brother is not." The lock clicked shut, leaving Isabella alone, shaking, in the suffocating silence. He had taken her pity and thrown it back in her face, wrapping it in a threat. She had seen the man, and now she had seen the monster that had been built to protect him. Chapter 7. Weeks bled into a month. Isabella measured the time in the changing shades of the cypress trees outside her window and the deepening silence of the villa. The house, once a place of bustling, terrified quiet, had settled into a true mausoleum. The staff moved on stockinged feet. Meals arrived and were taken away, often untouched. Sergio was a phantom. He was waging a war she only felt in tremors. Sometimes, a new, grim-faced man would appear at the villa, speaking in low, urgent tones with the guards at the end of her hall. Sometimes she would be woken in the dead of night by the sound of the gates opening and a car leaving, its engine a low growl fading into the hills. He never came to her room. He never so much as walked past her wing. The ice-cold, controlled Dawn, who had warned her to forget the broken man in the hall, had been true to his word. He had erased that man completely. The pity she had felt, that dangerous, unwelcome crack in her fear, began to seal itself over. What was left was the cold, hard reality. She was a prisoner, and her jailer was a man who had declared his own brother's death a miscalculation. She had seen the monster. She had seen the man, and now the monster had won. She was reading a book of poetry, one of Lorenzo's left in her room, the irony a constant bitter taste in her mouth, when the night exploded. It wasn't a single sound, but a cascade of them. A shout from the grounds, sharp and full of panic. The squeal of tires on the gravel drive, a car taking the turn to the villa far too fast. Then, the slam of car doors, a chorus of them, followed by more shouting. "Move! Dio, move! Open the damn door!" Isabella was at her door in an instant, her ear pressed to the wood. Her heart was a frantic bird against her ribs. This was not the sound of a drunken rage. This was not the sound of a controlled hunt. This was the sound of failure, the sound of a fortress being breached. She heard the heavy oaken front doors burst open. Heavy, frantic footsteps in the main hall. "In here! Get him to the library, presto! Clear the sofa! Rosa? Rosa, dove? Get the main kit. Merda, he's bleeding fast." A chorus of panicked, masculine voices, but one voice was conspicuously absent, Sergio's. A cold dread, sharper than any fear she had yet felt, seized her. "Let me go!" she yelled, rattling the brass handle of her locked door. "What's happening?" "Rosa, let me out!" She heard footsteps running toward her. A key fumbled in the lock. The door was wrenched open by a young guard she didn't recognize, his face pale and slick with sweat. "Signorina, you must stay in your room. It is not safe." She didn't let him finish. She shoved past him, her silk robe flying out behind her, and ran to the balustrade of the grand staircase. She froze. The main hall was chaos. Two of Sergio's personal guards, men built like mountains, were half carrying, half dragging a third man between them. It was Sergio. He was conscious, but barely. His head was lolling, his immaculate black suit jacket gone, his white shirt saturated with a horrifying, glistening crimson. His entire left side, from his shoulder to his waist, was a solid mask of blood. He was leaving a dark trail on the priceless marble floor. His face, usually so controlled and severe, was a waxy, ashen gray. His scar stood out against the pale skin like a slash of angry purple ink. "I said, 'No hospital,'" he growled, the words thick, slurring. "No, doctors." "We heard you, Don Sergio," one of the guards grunted, his arms straining under the dead weight. "But you're bleeding out." The library now. They disappeared from her view, staggering toward the wing that housed his private study and the vast two-story library. Isabella flew down the stairs, her bare feet slipping on the marble. The young guard grabbed her arm. "Signorina, please." "Get your hands off me," she hissed, ripping her arm from his grasp with a strength that shocked them both. She followed the trail of blood. She reached the library just as they were lowering him onto a massive, dark green leather Chesterfield sofa. He fell back against the cushions with a groan that was half surrender, half rage. Rosa was there, her face a mask of pure terror, her hands shaking so violently she could barely open the large, professional-grade medical bag on the floor. "A knife," one of the guards said, his voice tight. We were ambushed. The last of Petrov's men. We got them, but one got too close." "He needs a doctor, signore," Rosa wept, pulling out a handful of sterile gauze. "He needs a hospital." "No," Sergio ground out, his eyes squeezed shut. He tried to sit up, his hand clutching his side, but fell back, a fresh wave of dark blood pulsing between his fingers. "No. Hospital. Traitors. Everywhere. No. Hospital." "But signore," Rosa fumbled with a suture kit, her frail, aged fingers unable to tear the packet. I can't even... The thread. They were going to watch him die. He was the most powerful man in Sicily, surrounded by killers, and he was going to bleed to death on his own sofa because the old housekeeper's hands were shaking. A strange, cold calm settled over Isabella. It was the same void she had fallen into on her wedding night, a place where terror was so absolute, it became a kind of clarity. "Move," she said. The three men and Rosa turned to stare at her. She must have been a strange sight, a ghost in a white silk robe, her hair unbound, her feet bare. "Get out of the way, Rosa," she said, her voice sharp, clear, and utterly devoid of fear. She knelt beside the old woman and took the suture kit from her trembling hands. Signorina. My mother was a nurse," Isabella said, tearing the packet open with her teeth. She laid out the needle and the silk thread. "I've done this before. Many times." "Isabella!" Sergio's voice was a shocked rasp. His eyes were open, hazy with pain and blood loss, fixed on her. "Be quiet," she ordered, not looking at him. She looked at the two guards. "You. Get me a bowl of boiling water and towels, clean ones, now, and a bottle of whiskey. The good stuff. You." She pointed to the other. "Stand by the door and let no one in. No one." They were so stunned by her tone, they moved without question. "And you," she said to Rosa, her voice softening slightly. "Help me. Hold the light steady, and hold this." She handed Rosa a thick pad of gauze. "Press. Hard." She turned her attention to Sergio. "This is going to hurt," she said, her voice flat. "It always does," he wheezed, a grim shadow of a smile touching his lips before a wince of pain erased it. The guard returned with the supplies. Isabella dipped a clean cloth into the steaming water. "Take off your shirt," she told Sergio. He fumbled with the buttons, his fingers clumsy and slick with his own blood. "Can't." "Fine." Isabella took a pair of surgical shears from the kit. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the front of his $1,000 Egyptian cotton shirt and cut, ripping the fabric open from his neck to his waist. The shirt fell away, revealing the damage. She stopped. Her breath caught in her throat. The wound was bad. A deep, vicious gash that ran along his lower ribs, bubbling with every shallow breath he took. It was horrifying. But it was not the only thing. His entire torso was a roadmap of violence. She had seen the scar on his face. She had not been prepared for the tapestry of healed injuries that covered his skin. A puckered, star-shaped scar on his right shoulder. An old bullet wound. A thin, white line that ran from his collarbone to his sternum. A dozen smaller, silvery marks from knives. This was the vicious brother. The family's shield. The man born for the night. This was the price of keeping Lorenzo in the light. He was watching her. Even through the fog of pain, his gaze was sharp, intense, tracking her every expression. He was watching her see him. The real him. The scarred, broken, butchered body he kept hidden under pristine, tailored suits. "Are you going to stare, Piccola? Or are you going to fix me?" he whispered, the words slurred. The blood was welling up, dark and thick. He was losing time. She snapped back to the present. She took the bottle of whiskey, uncapped it, and poured a third of it directly into the open wound. Sergio roared. It was an inhuman sound, a bellow of pure, unadulterated agony. He arched off the sofa, his entire body rigid, his hands clawing at the leather. "Hold him!" she screamed at the guard by the door. The man ran over and threw his weight onto Sergio's shoulders, pinning him to the cushions. "You, Strega!" Sergio gasped, his eyes wild, his body trembling with shock and pain. "I will. I will." "You will be quiet," Isabella said, her voice shaking but her hands surprisingly steady. She grabbed the needle. "Or I will sew your mouth shut first." She took a deep breath, met his hate-filled, pain-mad eyes, and pushed the needle through his skin. Chapter 8. The needle point sank into his flesh. Sergio's body went rigid, a choked, guttural sound ripping from his throat. The guard, Giacomo, pinned his shoulders, but it was like trying to hold down a panther. Sergio's muscles, slick with sweat and blood, were coiled iron. "Hold! Still," Isabella commanded, her voice a low, vibrating wire. Her hands were not shaking. She was astonished to find they were rock-steady. The world had compressed to this single, gruesome point of light on his skin, the gleam of the curved needle, and the dark, rhythmic welling of his blood. She pulled the silk thread through, her motion economical, practiced. "Or so help me, I will put this needle through your tongue." "You witch," he hissed, his head twisting on the leather cushion. The scent of whiskey, his blood and his skin, a sharp, masculine, metallic scent, filled her lungs. It was suffocating, intensely personal. "I am the only thing keeping you from bleeding out on your $1,000 sofa," she retorted, her eyes never leaving the wound. She wiped the blood away with a whiskey-soaked cloth, clearing the path for the next stitch. He flinched violently at the fresh sting of the alcohol. "So unless you want your men to find you in a puddle in the morning, you will. Not. Move." She set the next stitch. And the next. It was a slow, brutal process. Each pull of the thread was a fresh wave of agony. She could feel it radiating from him. His breathing was a ragged, painful rasp. Sweat poured down his temples, plastering his dark hair to his skull. His good hand was fisted in the leather, his knuckles white, the material groaning under the strain. Rosa was weeping silently in the corner, praying to a rosary. Giacomo, the guard, was ashen-faced, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. But Isabella was in the eye of the storm. This was an intimacy more profound, more terrifying than any kiss. She was literally holding this man's life in her hands. Her fingers were slick with his blood, her palms braced against the unyielding muscle of his abdomen as she worked. She saw the full map of him now. The healed-over violence that defined him. She saw the man his brother was protected from. The family's enforcer. The shield. The scar. And he was watching her. Through the haze of pain, through the fog of blood loss and the burn of the whiskey, his dark eyes were fixed on her. They were no longer the cold, Arctic eyes of the dawn or the wild, pained eyes of the man who had roared at her touch. They were something else. Unfocused. Delirious. And stripped bare. "Why are you here?" he slurred, his voice thick. "Because your housekeeper is too old and your guards are too stupid to thread a needle," Isabella said, not looking up. She was halfway done. The gash was closing, but it was ugly. It would be a scar to rival the one on his face. "No," he insisted, his head moving restlessly. "Here, in my house. You brought me here. You locked me in. Remember? Shouldn't be here," he mumbled, his body relaxing slightly, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a heavy, delirious lethargy. "Should have sent you away." "It's a little late for that," she said, tying off a stitch. "Lorenzo," he breathed, his eyes fluttering. He always got beautiful things. Isabella froze. Her hands, so steady, suddenly trembled. She paused, the needle hovering. He got the sun, Sergio continued, his voice a ghost of its usual power, a raw, broken whisper. I got the dark. He got the praise. I got the whip. He was rambling, she told herself. He was dying a moment ago. It's the pain. It's the blood loss. She went back to work, her heart hammering a new frantic rhythm. He got you, Sergio whispered. Isabella's breath hitched. She stopped again. This time she looked at his face. His eyes were half closed, his long, dark lashes stark against the waxy pallor of his skin. The terrifying control was gone, melted away by pain, leaving something young and profoundly sad. I saw you, he murmured, his gaze drifting from her face to a point on the ceiling. At the Toscano Gala 2 years ago. She remembered. It was the first time she had been formally introduced to the Falcone family. Lorenzo had been charming, golden, and perfect. Sergio had been a dark shadow in the corner, his scar livid under the crystal chandeliers, his eyes. She had thought his eyes were full of hate. You were in green. Velvet. His words were slurring, running together. Like a principessa. He walked right to you. Of course, he did. The sun always finds the flower. Sergio, you're not making any sense, she whispered, her throat tight. Hold still. I'm almost done. She reached for the cloth to wipe the wound one last time. His hand shot out. His grip, even now, was steel. He caught her wrist, his bloody fingers locking around her skin. The half-threaded needle fell from her grasp, clattering to the floor. She gasped, startled, and tried to pull away. He held fast. Sergio, let me go! He tugged. It was a weak pull, but it was enough to unbalance her. She fell forward slightly, one hand landing on his bare chest, just above his heart, to steady herself. His skin was fire. She could feel the frantic, heavy thud of his heart under her palm. He turned his head on the cushion. His eyes, hazy and dark, found hers. They were inches apart. She could feel his hot, whiskey-laced breath on her lips. It should have been me, he rasped. A cold, terrible understanding dawned. He was confessing. He was wishing he had died instead of his brother. The guilt. It was eating him alive. Don't say that, she whispered, her voice trembling. That's not. You can't. No, he growled, a flash of the old fire returning. His grip on her wrist tightened, his thumb pressing into her pulse point. You don't. Capisci? You don't understand. He stared at her, his gaze so intense it was a physical burn. He was seeing her. Not the widow. Not his brother's wife. Her. It should have been you, he repeated, his voice dropping to a raw, possessive murmur that slid directly down her spine. From the first. Not him. Her world tilted. What? What are you saying? I saw you. First, he breathed, his eyes tracing her lips, her cheekbones, her eyes. Always. Watching. But I am the night. And you were, for the day, for him. This was not a confession of guilt. This was a confession of obsession. Sergio, you were always Mia, he whispered. Mine, in my head, my sin. And now you're here, in my house, wearing my brother's name. His eyes filled with a sudden, lucid rage that terrified her more than his violence. It was a jealous, primal anger that had been festering for years. "He's gone," Sergio slurred, his thumb stroking her pulse, a caress that felt like a brand. "And you're still here. You're mine. Now, Isabella. Mine. To protect." He said the word protect like it was a curse, like it was a life sentence. "Mine." His eyes rolled back. His grip on her wrist went slack, his hand falling away to his side. He was out, the combined shock, pain, and blood loss finally claiming him. Isabella remained frozen, poised over him, her hand still flat against his chest. His heart was still beating, a strong, steady rhythm under her palm. She was shaking, not from the blood, not from the fear. She was shaking from the revelation. All this time she had thought his cruelty was resentment, that he hated her because she represented the soft life he was denied, that he hated her because she was his responsibility. She had been wrong. He hated her because he wanted her. He had always wanted her. And now, by some sick, ancient law, the one thing he had coveted from his perfect brother had fallen directly into his hands. She was his responsibility. She was his possession. She was his sin. "Signorina?" Giacomo's voice snapped her back. She looked down. Her hand was still on Sergio's bare chest. Her other hand was covered in his drying blood. She snatched her hand back as if she'd been burned. She scrambled to her feet, backing away from the sofa, her robe stained, her heart threatening to beat its way out of her chest. "Is he?" Rosa whispered, her knuckles white on her rosary. "He's alive," Isabella said, her voice a hollow echo. He'll sleep. The wound is closed." She looked at the man on the sofa, the monster who had just ripped her entire understanding of the world to shreds. He wasn't just a monster. He was her keeper. And he had been obsessed with her from the very beginning. "Giacomo?" she said, her voice surprisingly cold. "Clean this up. And get him to his bed." "Yes, signorina." She turned and walked out of the library, past the blood trail, up the grand staircase, and back to her room. She locked the door, pushed the chair against it, and finally, collapsed. The man in the hall had been broken by grief. But the man on the sofa, he had just armed her with the most dangerous secret in the entire Falcone villa. Chapter 9. Isabella didn't sleep. She sat in the armchair by the window, the one Lorenzo had pointed out, the one with the best view of the sea. She watched the black sky soften to bruised purple, then to a sickly pale gray. She had washed Sergio's blood from her hands and arms, scrubbing until her skin was raw, but she could still smell it, that metallic, whiskey-laced scent. It was on her robe, a dark, stiff map of the violence she had stemmed. She had cast it into the corner of the room as if it were cursed. "He saw you first, always watching. My sin." The words echoed in the cavern of her mind, replaying with his slurred, raw voice. They were more terrifying than his threats, more brutal than his grip on her arm, more violating than the lock on her door. All his cruelty, his coldness, his barbed wire words. It wasn't hatred. It was hunger. It was a long, festering resentment that the one thing he coveted had been given to his brother, the golden heir, the one who got everything. And now Lorenzo was gone, and she was here, his. "You're mine now, Isabella, mine to protect." He had said it like a death sentence. A key turned in her lock. Isabella shot to her feet, her heart leaping into her throat. She grabbed the heavy crystal water carafe from the side table, her only weapon. The door opened. It was Rosa, her face pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She was carrying a breakfast tray, her hands shaking so badly the teacup rattled in its saucer. "Signorina?" she whispered, her eyes darting to the carafe in Isabella's hands. You are all right?" Isabella slowly lowered the carafe. Her muscles ached from the tension. "Yes, Rosa. I'm fine." "He is." Rosa set the tray down, her voice trembling. "He is awake. He is furioso." "Furious?" Isabella's blood ran cold. "Why? He's alive, isn't he?" "He is angry that you saw him. That anyone saw him like that. Weak." Rosa crossed herself. A gesture Isabella was beginning to see was as common as breathing in this house. "He has already broken 2 glasses. He is demanding to see you." "What?" He sent me to fetch you. He is in his rooms in the West Wing." So it begins. The sober reckoning. The monster was awake, and he would be coming to erase the man's confession. "He wants me?" Isabella said, a strange, cold boldness settling over her. "Then he can come here. I am not his servant to be fetched." Rosa's eyes went wide with pure, undiluted terror. "Signorina Numero, you do not understand what he is like." "I understand perfectly," Isabella said, her voice hard. "I am his prisoner, Rosa, not his maid. I will take my breakfast, here. If the Don wishes to speak to me, he knows where to find me. You may tell him that." Rosa looked as if Isabella had just asked her to hand-deliver a bomb. She backed out of the room, her hands fluttering, muttering, "Madre di Dio, she will be killed. She will be killed." The door clicked shut. But this time Isabella did not hear the key turn in the lock. A small victory, or perhaps a test. She ate. She forced herself to. She ate the toast, drank the tea. She was no good to herself if she was weak. If she was going to survive this, she couldn't be the trembling girl he had locked in here. She had to be the woman who had held his life in her blood-soaked hands and had not flinched. An hour passed. The silence in the villa was heavy, suffocating. Every creak of the old house made her jump. Then she heard it. The footsteps. Heavy, measured, and uneven. He was walking, but it was costing him. He was wounded, and he was coming for her. He didn't knock. The door was thrown open with such force that it slammed against the wall, the wood groaning in protest. Sergio stood in the doorway. He was a vision of pale, cold fury. He was dressed in a clean black shirt, the buttons done up to his throat, and black trousers. He was leaning heavily on a carved ebony cane, but he held himself with a rigid formality that was all the more menacing for the obvious pain it caused him. His face was ashen, his scar a livid purple. His eyes, though. His eyes were the worst. They were not hazy or delirious. They were sharp, black, and filled with a cold, murderous rage. He had come to put the monster back in its cage. "You were summoned," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. "And I was eating," Isabella replied, setting her teacup down with a hand that, to her eternal relief, was perfectly steady. She rose from her chair to face him. His eyes flickered over her. She was still in her nightgown from the day before, her hair unbound and tangled. He had last seen her like this, spattered in his blood, her hand on his chest. His lip curled. "You will come when I call." "Or what?" Isabella asked, the words out before she could stop them. "You'll kill me?" "You've had a month to do that, Sergio. Locking me in here seems to be your preferred method of torture. Or perhaps you'll bleed on me again. I'm afraid I've ruined one robe already." The silence that followed was so absolute, she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. His knuckles on the head of the cane went white. He took one step into the room, then another. Each one was a visible, painful effort. He was projecting strength. But she knew the truth. She knew the dozens of stitches pulling at his skin. She knew the weakness beneath the iron. "You have a sharp tongue, Vadova," he hissed, "for someone who is alive only by my grace. My name is Isabella. And I am alive because you haven't decided what to do with me, because your ancient barbaric laws say I am now your responsibility." She put a venom on the word that matched his. He stopped, a mere 5 feet from her. The air between them was electric, vibrating with unspoken, furious energy. He was close enough that she could smell the antiseptic soap on his skin, a faint trace of whiskey, and something else. That dark, personal scent of his that she now knew intimately. "You will forget what happened last night," he commanded. It was not a request. "You will forget everything you heard, everything you saw. You are the widow of my brother, living under my protection. That is all." He was erasing it. He was taking the raw, desperate, obsessed man she had seen and burying him alive. "You said his name," Isabella whispered, her voice dangerously quiet. "You said Lorenzo." Sergio's face, if possible, grew even colder. "I was delirious." "You said he got the sun, and you got the dark. You said he got me." He moved faster than she thought a wounded man could. He lunged, his left hand grabbing the front of her nightgown, fisting the material over her heart. He hauled her forward, off her feet, until her face was inches from his. The cane clattered to the floor. He was trembling, but not from weakness. It was from rage. "You will be silent," he snarled, his hot breath fanning her lips. His eyes were not cold now. They were burning. They were black pits of pure, possessive fury. "Or what?" she breathed, her hands coming up to brace against his chest. Her fingers splayed over his heart. She could feel the heavy, frantic slam of it beneath his shirt, matching her own. "You're angry I saw the truth? That for all your talk of responsibility, you're just as much a prisoner of this as I am?" "You know nothing," he spat. "I know you watched me for years," she hissed back, the terror finally giving way to a white-hot anger of her own. "I know you hated your brother, not for his power, but because he had what you wanted, and I know you hate me because now you're stuck with me." It was the most dangerous thing she had ever done. She was taunting a killer, a wounded one, in her own locked room. His grip on her gown tightened, pulling her so close their bodies were flush. His wounded side was pressed against her. She could feel the heat of his skin, the unyielding wall of his body. He was so much larger than she was. A dark, looming shadow of pain and rage. His gaze dropped to her mouth. It was a fraction of a second. A flicker of his lashes. But she saw it. The confession was not erased. It was starving. "I could snap your pretty lying neck," he whispered, his voice a velvet threat, "and tell your father you died of grief." "Then do it," she challenged, her voice shaking but her gaze locked on his. "Do it. Or let me go." They stood there, frozen for a heartbeat that stretched into an eternity, chest to chest, breath to breath. His eyes were a war, the cold dawn battling the obsessive man, the fury battling the hunger. She saw the flash of the man from the gala, the shadow in the corner. She saw the man on the sofa, his eyes hazy with pain, confessing his sin. And she saw the man here now, who was holding himself back by a single fraying thread. "Let me go," she repeated, her voice low. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping in his scarred cheek. He was so close. So close. She felt the warmth of his lips, the sheer animal heat of him. The air was too thick to breathe, with a sound of pure disgust. At her, at himself, at the entire situation. He shoved her. Isabella stumbled back, tripping over the leg of the chair, and fell, landing hard on the Persian rug. Sergio stood over her, his chest hewing, his hand fisted at his side where it had held her. He was breathing like a man who had just run a mile. He bent, slowly and painfully, to retrieve his cane. "You are not my equal, Isabella," he said, his voice once again the flat, cold steel of the dawn. "You are not my confidant. You are a duty." He turned, the full line of his back rigid. "Pack your things," he said, his hand on the doorknob. Isabella looked up from the floor, her heart stopping. "What? Why? Are you letting me go?" He looked at her over his shoulder, his expression unreadable, his eyes as dead and cold as a winter sea. "I am the head of this family now. I cannot rule from a cage in the hills. We are moving to the palazzo in Palermo, tonight." He was taking her with him. He was not releasing her. He was moving her from her gilded cage to a new one, in the center of his city, in the heart of his power. "I am not done with my revenge," he said, his voice a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "And you, Signora Falcone, are a part of it." He left. He didn't slam the door this time. He just closed it, the click of the latch sounding as final as a cell door. Isabella stayed on the floor, her body trembling with the adrenaline of the confrontation. She had pushed the monster, and the monster had pushed back. But he hadn't killed her. He hadn't even struck her. He had looked at her mouth. She brought a trembling hand to her lips. She had survived. More than that, she had fought him with the only weapon she had, his own secret. And she was still alive. He was taking her to Palermo, into the heart of his world. A new, terrifying thought occurred to her. He wasn't taking her to protect her. He was taking her to watch her. Chapter 10. Packing was a hollow, frantic charade. Isabella had nothing to pack. She had the clothes she had arrived in, the simple, respectable dress of a bride-to-be, which seemed to belong to a different woman from a different century. She had the black mourning dresses Rosa had procured for her, shapeless and heavy with a grief that was not entirely her own. And she had the nightgown she was currently wearing, the one that still held the ghost of Sergio's blood. Rosa came to help, her hands fluttering, her eyes wide with a fear so profound it was almost worship. She was terrified of Isabella. The signorina had challenged the dawn, the new, wounded, savage dawn, and she was still breathing. This elevated Isabella from victim to something new, something dangerous and unknowable. He has sent the car, signorina," Rosa whispered, folding a black dress into a small leather valise that had once been Lorenzo's. The monogram LF was stitched in gold thread by the handle. Isabella felt a sudden, sharp pang of nausea. "Thank you, Rosa," Isabella said, her voice calm. She was still sitting on the floor, her back against the armchair. She hadn't moved since he'd left. She felt bruised, body and soul, but a strange, cold clarity was settling in her veins, like ice water. He looked at her mouth. He was taking her to watch her. She stood, her legs aching. The robe, the one from last night. "Burn it." Rosa's eyes widened. "Signorina, it is fine silk." "It is stained," Isabella said, her voice flat. "Burn it. I will not have it in my sight." It was her first real order. Rosa, after a beat of hesitation, nodded, a new, sharp respect in her eyes. She bundled the dark, stiff silk and took it away as if it were a diseased thing. Isabella dressed in the simplest of the black dresses. She brushed her tangled hair, her arms heavy, and tied it back in a severe knot at the nape of her neck. She looked at her reflection in the ornate, gilt-edged mirror. She was pale, her eyes haunted and huge, dark circles like bruises beneath them. But she was not the trembling, weeping girl who had arrived here. The fear was still there, a cold, hard stone in her stomach, but it was no longer in control. It was a tool. It was a whetstone. She was the Signora Falcone, not Lorenzo's pretty, gentle wife. She was Sergio's, his duty, his sin. Giacomo, the guard who had held Sergio down, was waiting for her at the foot of the stairs. He did not meet her eyes. He too seemed to regard her with a new, wary awe. "Signorina, this way." The black sedan was waiting. A fortress on wheels, its windows tinted so dark they looked like polished obsidian. Sergio was already inside. He was in the back, on the opposite side, staring out the window as if he were alone. He hadn't waited for her. He hadn't helped her in. He was simply there, a looming, silent presence of pain and fury. Isabella slid onto the cold leather seat. The car was enormous, but his presence filled it, sucking all the air out. The scent of him, antiseptic, wool, and that sharp, underlying musk, was overwhelming. The door shut with a heavy, final thunk. A thick pane of glass slid up, sealing them off from the driver. They were in a box together, a dark, moving cage. The car pulled away, gravel crunching under the tires. Isabella stared straight ahead, her hands fisted in her lap. She would not look at him. She would not speak. She would not give him the satisfaction of her fear. For 20 minutes, the only sounds were the hum of the engine and Sergio's breathing. It was quiet, but she could hear the faint, ragged edge to it. The movement of the car had to be agony on his side. He was hiding it, but she knew. She had stitched the wound. She knew its depth. The car began its descent from the hills, and the lights of Palermo appeared below them, a glittering, beautiful net of stars spread out against the black velvet of the sea. "You are a part of my revenge," he said, his voice startling her from the silence. It was flat, devoid of emotion, as if he were dictating a letter. She turned her head. He was still looking out the "I don't understand," she said. "What does that mean?" "It means you are the perfect innocent widow. You are the symbol of my brother's stolen life." He turned his head from the window, and his eyes found hers in the dark. They were dead. "You are my greatest asset." "An asset?" "The other families, the commission, they see me as a brute, a savage, the scar. They respect my strength, but they fear my lack of restraint. They think I am a rabid dog who has broken his chain." The car was entering the city now, the streets bright. The noise of life a sudden shock after the villa's tomb-like silence. "But you," he continued, his gaze sweeping over her, critical and cold. "You are from an old family. You are respected. You are grief-stricken." He said the word with mocking contempt. "My protection of you, my honoring of my brother's wife is a sign of my control. It shows I am not just an animal. It shows I am a don. It shows I respect the old ways." "So I'm a prop," Isabella stated, the ice in her veins spreading. "A piece of theater. You lock me up, bleed on me, and then parade me in front of your murdering friends to prove you're civilized." A muscle jumped in his scarred cheek. "You will be silent. You will be grieving. You will be mine. And in doing so, you will lull them into a false sense of security. They will see me as a man bound by duty, not a man consumed by vengeance. And when they are comfortable, I will tear them apart, root and stem." This was his plan. This was the cold, brilliant calculation of the man who had run the family from the shadows for years. The car stopped. They were not in a grand, open piazza, but a narrow, ancient street. A set of massive, 20-foot-high iron gates barred the entrance to a building that looked less like a home and more like a fortress. The Palazzo Falcone. The gates opened. The car rolled into a cavernous, torch-lit courtyard. Men were everywhere. Dark suits, watchful eyes. They bowed as Sergio's door was opened. He got out of the car, his every movement stiff. He did not wait for her. Isabella stepped out into the humid city air. The palazzo loomed over her, a masterpiece of cold, Baroque stone, all gargoyles and shadows. The villa had been a gilded cage of grief. This was a stone prison of power. "Giacomo, take the signora to the Contessa's rooms," Sergio ordered, not looking at her. He was already walking toward a massive arched doorway, his cane striking the stones. "Ensure she has everything she needs." The Contessa's rooms, not her rooms. Giacomo led her inside. The interior was stunning and cold. Marble floors, vaulted ceilings, priceless tapestries that seemed to drink the light. It was a museum, not a home. It smelled of old stone, floor wax, and power. He led her up a winding staircase to a set of carved double doors and opened them. "Signorina." The suite was opulent. A massive four-poster bed, a sitting area, a marble bathroom, and a balcony. Isabella walked past the heavy velvet furniture, drawn to the one thing that mattered. She pushed open the glass doors. The balcony overlooked the sea, but it was a different sea. It was the port of Palermo, bustling, loud, alive. Below her, a vast, formal garden was laid out in the dark, a maze of hedges and white statues. It was beautiful, and the drop was at least 100 feet. "Dinner will be sent up," Giacomo said from the doorway. "The Don has work to attend to." "Giacomo," Isabella said, not turning around. "Am I a prisoner here?" The guard was silent for a long moment. "You are under the Don's protection, Signorina. No one can harm you here." "That wasn't my question." He cleared his throat. "The doors will not be locked." "But I would not advise leaving the palazzo. The city is not safe for you." He left, closing the doors quietly behind him. "The doors will not be locked." She was not a prisoner. She was a guest, a protected asset. She was free to roam the fortress, but she was just as trapped as she had been at the villa. She was exploring the massive walk-in closet, filled with another woman's clothes, beautiful, expensive, and years out of style, when he arrived. She didn't hear him. She just turned, and he was there. He was standing in the middle of the room, his cane gone. He was leaning one broad shoulder against the doorframe, as if he couldn't support his own weight for long. He had taken off his jacket. His black shirt was crisp, but she could see the faint outline of the bandages beneath it. "The Contessa was my grandmother," he said, his voice low. "She was the last woman to rule this house. She too was a widow." "How fitting," Isabella said, her heart starting its low, heavy drumbeat. He pushed off the wall and walked toward her, his limp more pronounced, his face tight with a pain he refused to acknowledge. He stopped at the foot of the bed, the massive, dark wood frame separating them. "This is not the villa," he said. "This is my home. My center of operations. You are not locked in. There are no guards on your door." He looked at her, his eyes unreadable. "You are free to leave." The words hung in the air, a stunning, sudden shock. "What?" "You are free to go," he repeated, his voice flat. "I have a car. It will take you to your father's house in Florence. I will tell him you were mad with grief and that I could not, in good conscience, keep you here." This was it. The offer. Her freedom. Everything she had wanted. "You'll let me go?" she whispered, her mind reeling. "Yes. You are a complication. You are a reminder." His jaw tightened. "My brother's wife." "My duty. I am honoring that duty by giving you your life back. Go home, Isabella. Forget the Falcone family. Forget all of this." It was a test. She knew it. After his confession, after her defiance, this was the only move he had left. He was offering her an escape, not for her sake, but for his. If she left, his sin left with her, his weakness. The one person who had seen him bleed, who had heard his secret. She looked at him, really looked at him. The new dawn. A king forged in fire and grief, just as the outline had said. He was in agony. He was holding himself together by sheer, brutal will. He was offering her freedom because he was terrified of what she represented. He was obsessed with her, and he was trying to cut out the cancer before it spread. He was giving her a choice, and for the first time in her life, she had one. She could run. She could go back to her father, back to a life of quiet, respectable non-existence, and pretend the last month had never happened. Or she could stay. She thought of the man on the sofa, his eyes hazy with pain, confessing, "I saw you first." She thought of the man in her room, his eyes burning, his hand fisted in her gown, his gaze dropping to her mouth. She thought of the man standing before her, a wounded, brutal king on a cold throne, offering her an escape because he was too afraid to keep her. "No," she said. His head snapped up, his cold composure cracking. A flicker of something, hot and wild, flashed in his eyes. "What did you say?" "I said no." She took a step toward him, around the bed. "You don't get to do this. You don't get to bleed all over me, confess your sin, drag me to your fortress, and then banish me because you're a coward." "I am not," he snarled, taking a step toward her, his rage surfacing. "You are," she interrupted, stopping a few feet from him. "You are terrified of me, because I'm the one person in this entire blood-soaked family who has seen you weak, the one person you can't control." "You are my duty," he hissed. "I am your obsession," she shot back, her voice low and shaking with a new, terrifying power. "And I am not going anywhere." "This is not a game, Isabella. This is my life. And it's mine, too. The one you took. The one you bound to yours by your ancient laws." She was trembling now, with adrenaline, with fear, with a terrible, exhilarating certainty. "You said I am part of your revenge. You said I am your asset. Well then, use me." He stared at her as if she had grown a second head. He was breathing heavily, his hands fisted. You would stay?" he whispered, his voice rough with disbelief. "Here." "With me?" "I am not staying with you," she said, her voice cold. "I am staying for me. I am staying because I am Signora Falcone, and I will not run and hide. I am staying because my husband was murdered, and I want to see the men who did it burn." It was a lie, a partial lie. She wanted that, yes. But the truth was more complex. She was staying because this man, this broken, vicious, obsessive man, was the first person who had ever truly seen her, and she saw him. "You want to heal Don Falcone?" she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You want to rule? Then you will have to do it with me at your side, because I am not leaving. I am not your weakness to be discarded. I am your queen." He didn't move. He just stared at her, the war in his eyes so profound it was a physical storm. The Don who wanted her gone, and the man who was desperate for her to stay, were ripping him apart. "You have no idea," he finally rasped, "what you are choosing." "And you have no idea," she replied, "who you just unbound." Chapter 11. Sergio's stillness was an indrawn breath before a scream. He didn't move for a full minute, his body a statue of taut muscle and coiled rage, his eyes locked on hers. The war she had seen in them didn't end. It simply shifted. The surprise was consumed by a dark, calculating coldness that was far more dangerous. He was recalibrating. He had offered his enemy a blade, and she had picked it up and pointed it at his throat. "My queen," he repeated, the words a low, soft hiss of pure mockery. He said it as if it tasted like ash in his mouth. You think this is a throne? This is a casket, Isabella. I am offering you a flight out, and you are asking to be nailed inside. Then we'll be buried together, she retorted, her voice shaking but her will a rod of steel. You need me. You said it yourself. I am your property, your asset. A grieving widow to prove you're not an animal. And what do you get? He shot back, taking a half step, a painful, limping motion that brought him closer. An empty title? A room in a prison? A front row seat to a war you know nothing about? I get to be Signora Falcone, she said, her chin lifting. Not a victim. Not a banished, grieving girl nobody wants. And I get to see my husband's murderers pay for what they did. You said you would tear them apart. I want to watch. The sheer, cold-blooded audacity of her statement hung in the air. He had expected tears, or fear, or at the very least, hesitation. He had not expected this. He had not expected a mirror of his own savage resolve. He let out a short, sharp breath that was almost a laugh, but it held no humor. It was a sound of disbelief and a dark, grudging respect. You have a spine of iron, he rasped, his eyes sweeping over her, no longer as an unwanted duty, but as a new, complex, and utterly unpredictable weapon in his arsenal. Lorenzo never saw it. He saw a pretty, gentle doll for his shelf. Lorenzo is gone, Isabella said, the words sharp and final. Yes, he is. The muscle in Sergio's scarred cheek jumped. And you are here. My queen. He was accepting, not her title, but her terms. She was staying. Fine, he said, and the word was a gavel strike. You stay. You want to be my asset? Then you will be. You will do exactly as I say. You will dress how I tell you, speak when I tell you, and smile at the very men I plan to kill. You will be the perfect porcelain face of my control. And in return, you get to watch. And my husband's killers? They are already dead, he said, his voice dropping to a promise that was colder than the grave. They just haven't stopped breathing yet. I have their names. I have their families. And I am a patient man. He was in complete control again, the dawn. But the man was still there, betrayed by the body. He turned too quickly. The movement, meant to be decisive, a final dismissal, was a mistake. A low, sharp gasp of pain was ripped from his throat, a sound he couldn't swallow in time. His hand flew to his side, his face going ashen, sweat beading instantly on his temples. He braced himself against the four-poster bed, his knuckles white, his eyes screwed shut. The iron facade had shattered, revealing the wounded man beneath. Isabella didn't think. She moved. She was at his side in an instant. You're bleeding. Get away from me, he snarled, but his voice was thin, his body betraying him. You tore your stitches, she said, her voice flat, ignoring his command. I could smell the blood when you walked in. You're a fool. You're not a god, Sergio. You're just a man, and you're bleeding like one. She put her hand on his arm. Sit down. Now. He flinched as if she'd burned him. I am fine. You are a liar, she countered, her voice sharp, devoid of pity, and full of an authority that came from having held his life in her hands once already. Are you going to collapse in front of your men, Don Falcone? Or are you going to sit down and let me fix what you broke, you stubborn, arrogant idiota? The insult, so personal and so true, shocked him into silence. The fight went out of him, replaced by a wave of pain-induced weakness. He didn't have the strength to fight her. Not physically. He let her guide him to the plush, velvet armchair. He sank into it, his head falling back, his breathing ragged. The bandages are in my bathroom, he ground out, his eyes closed. Through My study, next door. Stay there, she ordered. Don't move. Don't even breathe. She walked out of her room into the grand, cold hallway and to the massive oak door next to hers. It was unlocked. His study was a cavern of dark wood, leather, and the scent of old books and his own faint, masculine smell. A massive carved desk dominated the room, covered in neat stacks of paper. Beyond it, another door stood open. His bathroom was a shrine of black marble and steel. It was obsessively clean. On the counter, laid out with surgical precision, was a medical kit. Bandages, antiseptic, tape, and a small brown bottle of painkillers. He had known he was bleeding. He had come to her anyway, to offer her freedom, to push her away, all while he was quietly coming apart at the seams. She gathered what she needed and returned. He hadn't moved. He looked pale, exhausted, and furious. A wounded panther trapped in a velvet chair. "This is going to hurt," she said, setting the supplies on a side table. "Just do it," he hissed. She didn't ask him to take his shirt off. She grabbed the hem. "Lift your arms." He did, his movements stiff. She pulled the fine black shirt up and over his head. Her breath caught. His entire torso was a map of violence. Old scars, faded and white, crisscrossed his ribs. A puckered bullet hole rested just above his left pectoral. And then there was her work. The white bandage was soaked through, a bright, grotesque flower of red blooming on his side. "You are a child," she berated him, her voice a low, angry tremor as she began to peel the tape back. "Running a war when you can't even stand. And you are a nagging wife," he retorted, his voice tight with pain as the tape pulled at his skin. "I am the widow," she corrected him, her voice sharp. "And I am the only one in this fortress who knows what a fool you are." She ripped the bandage off. He roared, a low, guttural sound, his whole body arching off the chair. "Be still," she commanded, her hands immediately pressing a clean gauze pad to the wound. He was bleeding freely. "You've torn the last 3 stitches, completely. Just fix it." "I don't have a needle." "I am going to have to butterfly it. It will scar." "Do I look," he panted, his head falling back again, "like I give a damn about another scar?" She worked. Her hands were sure, her movements precise. She cleaned the wound with the stinging antiseptic. He flinched violently, his whole body rigid, his good hand fisting the arm of the chair, but he did not make another sound. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by his harsh breathing and the small clinical sounds of her work. This was a new intimacy, far more dangerous than the one in the library. He was not delirious. He was wide awake. And he was watching her. She was leaning over him, her face close to his bare chest, her hair, which had come loose from its knot, brushing his shoulder. She could feel the furnace heat of his skin, feel the tremor of pain that ran through his muscles. She could smell him, the sharp, clean antiseptic, and the intoxicating dark scent beneath it. She was so focused on the wound, on pulling the edges together with the small, sterile strips, that she didn't realize how close they were until she finished and reached for the clean bandage. When she looked up, his eyes were on her. He wasn't the Don. He wasn't the wounded soldier. He was the man from the library, the one who had confessed. His eyes were black, his pupils blown wide, his gaze so heavy it was a physical weight. He was watching her with a raw, desperate, agonizing hunger that terrified and fascinated her in equal measure. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at her mouth. "You should have left, he whispered, his voice a gravelly, rough caress. You should have let me, she whispered back, her hands frozen on his skin. I tried. No, you didn't. He was looking at her as if he was starving and she was a banquet. He hated her for being there, for seeing him like this, for having this power over him. And he wanted her with a force that was a living thing in the room, a third presence, dark and suffocating. You enjoy this, he accused, his voice low and dangerous. Seeing me. Weak. I enjoy surviving, she said, her voice trembling, but she didn't pull away. You are the one who is weak. You are the one who is obsessed with his brother's wife. She was playing with fire, a wild fire. His hand shot up, his fingers wrapping around her wrist. It was the same grip as in the library. Steel, possessive. Do not say that again, he snarled. Or what? She challenged, her pulse hammering against his grip. You'll throw me out? You already tried. You'll kill me? You're too weak. You can't even stand up. I can do this. He tugged. It was not a request. It was a demand. He pulled her off balance and she fell, her free hand landing on his bare shoulder, her body half sprawled across his, her face a breath from his. She was on him. Her breasts were crushed against his hard, unyielding chest. Her leg was between his. His skin was fire. Sergio. She breathed, her voice gone. You wanted to be queen, he rasped, his eyes burning into hers. Queens share the king's burdens. Queens share his bed. You are wounded, she stammered, her mind shutting down, her body reacting on a purely primal level. He smelled of danger, and she wanted to lean in. My side is wounded, he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips, his hot breath fanning across them. The rest of me is fine. He was hard beneath her. The proof of his sin was pressing against her hip, an undeniable, shocking, and visceral truth. You chose to stay, he whispered, his hand tightening on her wrist, his other hand coming up, his fingers tangling in her hair, holding her head. Now, you will stay. He was going to kiss her. Here. Now, wounded, furious. He was going to claim the mouth he had been staring at. And Isabella, to her own profound and terrifying shock, did not pull away. Chapter 12. His mouth was a breath away. The world narrowed to the space between their lips. Isabella's hands were fisted on his bare skin, one on his shoulder, one on his arm, and she could feel the violent, painful tremor that ran through him. It was rage, it was need, it was the agony of his wound. His eyes were no longer the Dawn's. They were the eyes of the man who had confessed in the library, the man who had watched her for years. They were black, possessive, and stripped bare of all pretense. He was looking at her as if he intended to devour her. His hot, whiskey-laced breath fanned her lips. You chose this, he rasped, the words a final, possessive claim. He lowered his head that final inch. Isabella's eyes fluttered shut. Her body was a taut wire, thrumming with a terrifying, electric anticipation that drowned out every ounce of fear, every dictate of sense. She was falling. She was letting herself fall. And then he was gone. With a guttural roar of self-loathing, he shoved her. It wasn't a gentle push. It was a violent, desperate rejection. He threw her off him with all his remaining strength, sending her stumbling back until she hit the cold marble of the fireplace, the impact jarring her teeth. Sergio surged to his feet, a colossal, wounded animal. He was breathing in great ragged gasps, his bare chest heaving, his hand clamped to his freshly bandaged side. The room was spinning. Or maybe she was. "Get out!" he snarled, his voice a raw wound. He wasn't looking at her. He had turned his back, his head bowed, his free hand braced against the mantel. He was shaking. Not from pain, but from the force of the control he was reasserting. Isabella's own breath was coming in short, sharp gasps. Her lips burned, as if they had been kissed by a ghost. By a fire. Her hand was pressed to her chest, where her heart was trying to beat its way out of her ribs. He had stopped. He had been a hair's breadth from kissing her, from claiming her, and he had stopped. He had pushed her away as if she were poison. The rejection was a physical blow, sharper and more stunning than the shove. She started, her voice a reedy, unfamiliar thing. "I said, get out!" He slammed his fist down on the marble mantel, the sound like a gunshot in the tense silence. "Go to your room. Do not come near me again." He was furious. Not at her, she realized with a cold, dawning clarity. He was furious at himself. He had lost control. He had proven her right. She was his weakness. She was his obsession. And he had just shown his entire hand. He had just shown her that she, the grieving widow, his prisoner, had a power over him that terrified him to his very core. The queen had found the king's weak point. Isabella straightened, pulling the tattered edges of her dignity around her. Her body was screaming with adrenaline, a cocktail of fear and a strange, dark, illicit thrill. She did not run. She did not cower. She walked, her head high. She passed him, so close she could feel the waves of heat and fury rolling off his skin, and walked back into her own room. She closed the adjoining door between their suites. There was no lock, but the heavy click of the latch was a statement. She was safe. He had let her go. She leaned against the solid wood, her body finally succumbing to the tremors. She brought a trembling hand to her lips. They were tingling. Unkissed, but branded all the same. He wanted her. With a violence that eclipsed his hatred, with a desperation that overrode his iron control. He wanted her, and he despised himself for it. This changed everything. This was not a cage. This was a chessboard, and she had just captured his king. Or at least, she'd put it in check. She spent the rest of the day in her opulent new room. Food was brought by a silent maid who wouldn't meet her eyes. The news had clearly spread. The Don and the Signora were at war. Or something worse. Isabella ate. She bathed in the massive marble tub, scrubbing his scent from her skin. But it was useless. It was in her head. She changed into one of the Contessa's dresses, a simple, elegant black silk. She was armoring herself. He had told her to stay away. He had banished her. So she would wait. The next move was his. He couldn't leave it like this. He couldn't leave a live bomb in the room next to his. He came after midnight. She was in the armchair by the open balcony doors, the sea breeze a cool balm on her hot skin. She heard the adjoining door open. She didn't turn. He stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the light from his study. He was dressed. A clean black shirt, a fresh suit jacket, his hair damp as if he'd just showered. He was the Don again. The mask was back in place, perfectly sealed. He was leaning on his cane. "You have made your choice," he said. His voice was not the raw, ragged rasp from earlier. It was the flat, cold, dead voice of the man who had locked her in the villa. "And I have made mine." Isabella turned her head to look at him. "And what is that? You wish to be queen?" "Fine." He walked into the room, his limp pronounced but controlled. He did not come near her. He stood in the center of the vast room, a commander on a battlefield. Your duties begin tomorrow, he said. At 10 a.m., a car will take you to a sartoria in the city. You will be fitted for a new wardrobe, one appropriate for the Signora Falcone, not a ghost in her grandmother-in-law's clothes. You are dressing your prop, she said, her voice just as cold. I am arming my asset, he corrected. At 2 p.m., you will accompany me to my cousin's villa for his daughter's christening. You will be silent, you will be beautiful, and you will look at me as if I am your savior and not your jailer. Is that understood? And what if I refuse? He gave her a thin, cruel smile. Then you will have proven that you are not a queen, but a child playing a game you cannot win. You will have proven that you are useless to me, and I will send you back to your father in disgrace. The choice to stay is not a single act, Isabella. It is one you must make every single day, and you will make it on my terms. This was the price. She had won the battle, had forced him to admit his weakness, but he was winning the war. He was taking her choice, her defiance, and twisting it into a new, more ornate cage. He wasn't just locking her up, he was putting her on display. She stood. She walked to him, stopping just outside of his reach. I understand, she said. I will be your perfect grieving widow. I will be your asset. But I have a price. His scarred eyebrow raised. You are in no position to— I am, she cut him off. You are asking me to walk into a room full of your enemies. You are asking me to smile at the men who may have helped kill my husband. You are asking me to be your shield. If I am to be your queen, I will not be your pawn. What do you want? He hissed. Information. The word was a shot in the dark. I will not be blind. You said you have their names. I want to see them. I want to know who I am smiling at. I want to know whose hands I am shaking. If I am to be your partner in this theater, then I will not do it as a fool. He stared at her, his eyes narrowing. He was assessing her again. The surprise was back, that flicker of dark, grudging respect. She was not asking for jewels, or freedom, or comfort. She was asking for weapons. He saw her. The real her. The one who had stitched his side, the one who had taunted him, the one who had stayed. You are playing a game, he whispered, that will get you killed. I am already dead, she whispered back. The woman I was died on her wedding night. You are the one who said it. I am Signora Falcone, and she deserves to know who she is at war with. He held her gaze for an eternity. The air between them was thick, not with the hot, raw tension of before, but with a new, cold, and far more dangerous understanding. He gave a single, sharp nod. Tomorrow, he said, after the christening. I will show you what you are fighting. He turned and walked out, his cane striking the marble. The door clicked shut, leaving her alone in the cavernous, beautiful room. Isabella walked onto the balcony. The city lights glittered below, and the smell of the sea was sharp and real. She had done it. She had survived. She had faced the monster, and she had faced the man, and she had forged a new place for herself in this blood-soaked world. She was not Lorenzo's wife. She was not her father's daughter. She was Sergio Falcone's queen, his asset, his obsession. She brought her hand to her lips, where the ghost of his kiss still burned. He had pushed her away, but it was too late. He had started a fire, and she was beginning to think they would both enjoy the inferno.